Ah, Belize, the only country in Central America with an official language other than Spanish. And that's not even counting all the languages spoken by its many different ethnic groups. It's got history as old as the Mayans, colonial rule from both the British and Spanish, and a brief but infamous stint as part of a much larger empire. Hey there, guys. I'm your host, and you're watching this channel. So let's take a look at where Belize came from. The earliest inhabitants of what is today Belize were the Maya people, who trace their origins back to the 2000 BC. Their society was organized into city-states and during their classic period, which lasted from around 250 to 900 AD. They built impressive structures like the El Pilar complex on the border of present-day Belize and Mexico. But around the 9th century, they mysteriously abandoned these settlements and moved further south, leaving behind the ancient yet almost entirely unknown world of the Maya. Then, centuries later, across the ocean, a new empire was rising. Located in the Yucatan Peninsula, the Maya civilization was one of the largest and most influential in pre-Columbian America, rivaled only by the Aztecs and the Inca. But it wasn't just the size of the empire that made it so important. It was also one of the most advanced societies in the Old World. They developed a sophisticated calendar system based on astronomical observations. They used a unique writing system to record their history and culture. They created intricate artwork and mastered several technologies, including the art of building pyramids and temples out of solid stone. But despite their many accomplishments, the Maya were never able to unite all of the independent city-states under one banner. Unlike some of their contemporaries in the New World, this lack of unity would be the Maya's undoing. In the 16th century, outside forces began to encroach on their territory. The Aztec Empire expanded northward from Mexico, and the Inca Empire pushed southward from what is today Peru. Caught in between these two powers, the Maya found themselves at a disadvantage. But neither empire would end up conquering the Maya, because another power would arrive first. In 1520, a Spanish conquistador named Hernán Cortés led an expedition into the Yucatan. After years of fighting, the Spanish were victorious and claimed the region for Spain. The Maya people were subjugated, their cities looted, and their temples destroyed. Only a few escaped the brutal oppression of the Spanish by fleeing deep into the jungle or across the sea to modern-day Belize. Here they encountered another group of indigenous people called the Caribs or Caribbeans, who had arrived in the area around 1500. These two groups of people then formed loose alliances with each other and the British to fight against the Spanish. You see, the British weren't interested in Central America at first. But once the Spanish began mining for precious metals in the region, they became very interested. To protect their interest, the British sent in wood industry pioneer Sir Henry Morgan to establish a base in the area. He set up shop on an island in the Caribbean Sea and brought over African slaves to work in lumber camps. For a while, it looked like the wood industry would be the main industry in the area. But by the mid-1700s, the supply of mahogany had dwindled, and the British shifted their focus to developing a profitable agricultural industry instead. They grew sugar, cacao, indigo, and more on plantations worked by those same African slaves. During this time, the British colonies in North America began to grow as well. As the 13 colonies moved closer and closer to independence, the British government realized that if it didn't establish a strong presence in Central America, the newly independent United States might take over the region instead. So, to keep an eye on things, they consolidated their holdings in the area into a single colony called British Honduras. The name came from the Spanish name for the area, which they took after the deep waters near the coast, which were believed to be the resting place of the biblical ship carrying the body of Moses. Meanwhile, the rest of Central America was divided between the Spanish colonies of Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, and Nicaragua. But unlike the rest of the region, British Honduras was spared the civil wars and dictatorships that plagued its neighbors. The reason why was that the colony was mostly inhabited by three isolated groups of people who didn't really get along anyways. There were the old wood industry workers living on the coast, the African slaves working the plantations in the interior, and the descendants of the Maya and Carib peoples living in the jungle. The fact that these groups were isolated from one another helped to maintain peace and stability in the colony. Also helping matters along was the fact that the colony was completely overshadowed by its much larger neighbor, Guatemala. Most of the action in Central America was happening in Guatemala, so the British government didn't think it necessary to station any troops in British Honduras. That duty fell to the governor of Jamaica instead, but in the late 1800s, things would change. In 1821, Mexico won its independence from Spain and quickly laid claim to British Honduras. Then, in 1840, the first serious attempt at Central American Federation was made, uniting all 5 of the Central American colonies, but this union lasted less than 100 years. By the start of the 20th century, Guatemala was attempting its own personal version of manifest destiny, trying to reclaim territories lost to foreign powers. They eyed the small colony of British Honduras, still ruled by the British, as their first target. Tensions rose until the British government finally agreed to hold a plebiscite, the results of which showed that the vast majority of British Hondurans wanted to remain a part of the British Empire. Guatemala did not accept these results, however, and it would come to blows with Britain over the issue. Thankfully, the U.S. stepped in to mediate and establish diplomatic relations with British Honduras in 1913, recognizing them as an independent nation. And that stayed the expansionist ambitions of Guatemala. The U.S. and Britain continued to support each other's colonies throughout the 20th century, particularly through the good times. Both were granted control over the Panama Canal and co-managed the United Fruit Company, which operated huge plantations across Central America. The U.S. helped defend Belize during the Banana Boat Wars, a series of conflicts in the early 1900s in which the company hired private armies to fight against rebel groups in Central America. And they also helped it during both World Wars. During World War II, men from Belize served in the British Armed Forces, even though Belize was not yet a self-governing nation. This service helped to pave the way for them to become a fully fledged part of the British Empire in 1946 when it was granted self-government, and in 1964 they gained full independence. The road to independence, however, was a turbulent one. A political party advocating independence from Britain, called the People's United Party, or PUP, emerged in the 1940s. The PUP won elections in 1950 and began pushing for independence, but the British government was hesitant to grant it. They were worried that if they set the example for decolonization in Central America, then the other colonies would demand the same thing. Nevertheless, by the 1960s, it was clear that Belize would become independent soon. The British government knew this, so they began to prepare the country for self-rule by introducing a new constitution. But this new constitution was far from perfect. Many people felt that it gave too much power to the leader of the opposition party and not enough to the PUP. Violence broke out and independence was delayed until 1981, when Belize finally gained its freedom. It is worth noting that the period of independence from Britain, but before membership in the UN, was a very weird one. You see, when Belize became independent, its new neighbors, Guatemala and El Salvador, still had territorial claims on the new nation. So the only way Belize could join the UN was if it shared borders with 2 recognized sovereign states. The solution to this little problem was for Honduras and Guatemala to first recognize Belize and establish an official border with it before it could join the organization. When they refused, the U.S. threatened military intervention. Eventually, however, all three nations agreed to settle the matter diplomatically, and everyone got what they wanted. Belize was admitted to the UN and established firm borders with its neighbors. Since then, Belize has been known as one of the jewels of Central America, a stable democracy with a thriving economy and a commitment to environmental protection. So there you have it, the history of Belize in 100 seconds. Thanks for watching.